Caring for Kids God's Way, a biblical counseling certificate program in child advocacy developed by the American Association of Christian Counselors through Light University. Your ministry is to be a Galatians 6:2 helper. Ours is to equip you with the highest level of advanced training from the world's leading Christian counselors. 24 experts teaming up to create the most comprehensive child studies curriculum for the personal classroom. May the Lord bless your study as you begin caring for kids God's way. Co-authors of the books Loving Your Kids Too Much and Why You Do the Things You Do, and Liberty University doctoral program professors. Caring for Kids God's Way presents AACC President Dr. Tim Clinton with psychologist Dr. Gary Sibsey, Angry, Defiant, and Violent Kids.
Hi, I'm Tim Clinton, and this is Gary Sibsey. We're delighted you've joined us for this course on families in crisis, dealing with the angry, defiant, and strong-willed child. Our prayer is that God will take this content and multiply it so that our kids are helped. We're dads. We love kids. A lot of our work together early on was dealing with numerous families and some pretty troubling situations, but there's nothing more fun, Gary, than to see kids free. Kids out on baseball fields, kids at plays and in school, where you know they feel safe, secure, and they're growing in the Lord. Well,
an interesting thing about kids is they love to laugh. They smile about 45 times every hour, and a belly laugh about 70. It's about 7.5 belly laughs in an hour as well. So kids like to have fun, but what this video is going to cover is when it's no longer fun, and parents are stressed out and they feel helpless and they don't know exactly what to do about their child.
Why don't you grab your outline and start working through the course with us. I want to set this up with a biblical framework. First of all, understanding that God's Word is not silent about any issue in our life. Really, there's so much that we can glean from Scripture. And when it comes to our kids, there's a lot to mine out. Psalm 127 is where I think is a great place to start. Verse 1 says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." God is and must be the centerpiece to every home. And when you spiritually connect with Him and you know who you are in Him, you have something to give. Now in verse 3, watch this. It says, "Lo, kids are an heritage of the Lord." They're a gift from God. I'm a gift from God. Doesn't matter if they're in the mall, Gary, acting like wild kids, you know what I mean? Sometimes you want to strangle them, choke them. But they really are a gift from God because, let's go to Deuteronomy 6:6-9. The home is the incubator out of which little hearts and hands are fashioned. That means, in this passage in Deuteronomy 6:6-9, the idea is that truth, the things or ways of life, are to be a part of our own life. It's to be saturated in us, so that in everything we do, Gary, it's there. So by the process of osmosis, our children begin to absorb and soak up things that are beautiful. The ways of living, the habits. And it even goes not only to our children, but to our children's children. Gary, what's the concept you think that's coming through that passage?
Well, we call it the concept of coaching kids. And the idea and the metaphor is this, that just as a child who's trying to learn a baseball skill and he doesn't have it down, what a coach does is they help sort of draw that out in the child, and they begin assuming the child doesn't know how to do it, and they work little bit by little bit, piece by piece, in coaching that child and sort of creating a scaffold around him that helps him build that thing in place. If you ever watch little leaguers play, right, the little T-ballers, you've got 5 or 6 coaches out on the field. Why? Because these kids don't really know exactly what they're doing, and they have to sort of take them over and show them how to pick the ball up and throw it to first base. And our kids, as far as it goes, is learning how to deal with their emotions and learning how to handle their behaviors and their impulses and to deal with frustrations. These are things that they don't come into the world with the ability to do.
And so it's taught.
And part of what parents do is they become coaches in spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence in teaching their children how to live within limits and how to deal with their emotions, especially anger and frustration.
Another passage that I find fascinating is in Ephesians chapter 6. You're familiar with it. That verse 1 there begins with, "Honor your mother and your father." On down, in verse 4, it says, "Dads, don't provoke your kids to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord." Now, Gary, don't provoke your kids to wrath. Parents, obviously then, the inference is that we can have an adverse effect on our children.
Well, absolutely. And when you think about...
It's almost angering that we can anger our kids.
That we can anger our kids. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think the Scripture is saying, don't say no to that candy bar because it's going to make Junior mad. That's not what it's saying. There's things that we do as parents that can honestly provoke them to wrath. And as a parent, you know what these things are. There's times that we're absolutely disrespectful to our kids. We talk to them in ways that we wouldn't talk to anyone else. And this creates a lot of anger in kids. And the hard thing about anger that children, when they experience it toward their parents, is we'll talk, it scares kids because they really think that their anger can hurt you in a way. And see, you're the person they look to for comfort and security. And for them to be angry with you just creates a ton of confusion on the inside. So, and this confusion then gets relayed into their relationship with God ultimately, where they have very mixed feelings about God. Does he love me? Does he not love me? Am I angry with him? Am I not angry with him? And a lot of times it can set kids up to ultimately move away from God in the same way that he might or she might move away from you.
Proverbs has a lot to say about raising children. That one passage, Proverbs 22:6, Gary, says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, the responsibility on the part of parents. And investedness is ours. Proverbs 22:15, I found this fascinating. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. These kids can get out of bounds. And there are homes where you can be doing everything seemingly right, okay? And these kids are still going all over the place. Yet, persistence, a level of just maintaining structure, boundaries, love with limits is so important to keep them sort of in the box. When kids get out of control, they are a reproach to a mom and dad.
Yeah, and the foolishness is back to implying that kids don't know and they naturally will act in ways that are self-defeating to themselves. And part of what we do as parents is that we are trainers, that we are coaches, and we have to really train our children and not assume that they just have the capacity. And one of the things that we'll want you to ask yourself along the lines is, in some cases, do you make the assumption that your child naturally just has the ability to deal with their feelings? In the same way that you would, you throw a ground ball to a child and he misses it, and you say, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you pick that ball up and throw it to first base? Assumes that he knows how to do that.
Right.
And same thing with our kids' tough emotions, especially anger and frustration. They have to learn how to deal with that. You don't simply just tell them to do it. You have to teach them.
Absolutely. And the Word is also, it's interesting, there are so many stories in there. It's not silent on unhealthy relationships, unhealthy families. I think of David and his son Absalom, Gary. I think of Joseph there in the latter part of Genesis, where in that family system, here was a son who was well favored by his father and winds up being sold. Literally, they were going to kill him. You know that? Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the story where he makes a reconnection with his family and the power of that family tie when he finally reveals himself as second only in the house of the Pharaoh, when they finally come down to get grain and he reveals himself. He weeps after all those years and after all that blessing in his life. The power of family is incredible in the Word of God. And of course, the prodigal son. But Gary, let's wrap up this part by introduction. Let's get to the core content here. And one of the things we don't want to do is come across as a parent-bashing type of lecture here at all. We want to encourage you. We want to teach strategies and skills to more effectively deal with angry, defiant, and strong-willed kids. But it seems to me, Gary, that parents today are probably, and families, are more pressed, stressed, and duress than ever before. I was reading a little piece, a clip out of an article that said, could it be that we possibly are the first generations to be widely unavailable to our kids? And the inevitable loser of this life in the fast lane is that little guy or girl with their nose pressed up against the window pane, waiting for mom or dad to come home. And what it does is it still instills within them, Gary, a sense of real anger and frustration, where they don't know what to do. And one thing is sure, anger will always find an expression.
It will. And the other thing about that mindset is it's the child pressed up with his nose against the window, wondering when you're going to be home. Remember, the model that your child develops about you, and are you there and are you available, is ultimately the model that they develop about God. And when you're there, when you're with them, when you're in their face connecting with them, that creates a model of God, ultimately, that He is there, He is with you, and He is very interested in your life.
So you bring that scenario together, Gary, with the idea that there are some kids who are naturally bent toward, and they have this temperament, this disposition, that's just the way they are. They're going to be strong-willed. They're going to be a little angry, a little edgy. And so dealing with that can be really, it's going to take a lot of hard work.
It is.
Let's go to characteristics of angry and defiant kids. Gary, some of the core signs of kids who are oppositionally defiant, kids who manifest a level of anger, frustration that we see often. You may see it in the mall out here today.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like?
Well, it's generally a pattern of what we'd call negativistic, meaning no matter what you do, they don't like it. Okay? Hostile, meaning lots of temper tantrums and those types of things. And defiant behavior that you see in kids. And this is a pattern. This isn't something that just lasts a day or two. All right? This is something that lasts for 6 months or more. It has other characteristics. I mean, there's temper tantrums. These kids argue with you. They lose their temper. They blame others for their problems. They don't accept responsibility. They're easily annoyed, and they annoy other people in fact, they seem to enjoy annoying other people. They can be very angry and resentful and spiteful and vindictive. So when you look at this pattern, if you look at all these things that come together, it's a child who's very angry, and and his defiance and his vindictiveness and his negativity, all these things sort of represent his way of saying, I am ticked off at you and the world. That's what we're talking about by the angry, defiant
Gary,
child.
is the prevalence of this behavior, what level is it? I mean, I think all kids are going to go through a rebellious stage. I think of the terrible twos, and I think of just periodic episodes. I know Zach, there are times when you can tell when he wakes up. Mm-hmm. I mean, he just the wrong side of the bed today.
Yep.
You know, that's characteristic of all kids. They're going to have bad hair days.
Yep, they are, and they may have bad weeks. Okay, but
almost like rhythms.
That's right. They get into. They may have a couple bad weeks and a couple good weeks, but children, this kid has been struggling this way for about 6 months, at least. And a lot of times parents will see this developing. They'll see it starting, 2, 3. They never get out of the 2, terrible twos, and they last into the 4, 5, 6-year-olds. In fact, 6-year-old is the primary time, is the most common time for this to start to emerge. And part of it is because of the transition into school. And now there's requirements to behave not only at home, but also in school, and to negotiate all those transitions that go in there.
The level of prevalence, Gary, how common is defiance, this kind of defiance in children?
Right. There's a lot of different studies, but it's generally about 5 to 10% of kids. So, 1 in 10 kids can struggle with this, or 10 in 100.
Gary, does it just sort of snap out of the blue, or are there typical ages where onset usually you can pinpoint, you can go back and say, you know what, there was, usually about school, when they started kindergarten or first grade or something like that? Is that a marker?
Well, yeah, that can be one. So transitions for families and family stressors can be times when you'll start seeing this pattern of behavior emerge. Some of the common ones are, for example, say your child has always been well behaved and they're 6 or 7 years old. They go to school. Let's say your marriage has started to struggle and mom and dad have started arguing more, or dad's changed jobs and now he's out of town more frequently, or somebody in the family gets sick. I've seen this happen on a number of occasions where a chronic illness, chronic back pain, or an injury that puts a parent out of commission and they're no longer available to the child.
So those things precipitate this and tend to break it on.
That's one way here.
Okay, well, we'll talk about these pathways in just a moment, but let me stay with these characteristics.
Right.
So some core symptoms, we went through the prevalence of it. The difference, Gary, between a strong-willed child and a defiant kid, we acknowledge a difference between those two categories.
Strong-willed kids are kids who have a lot of energy, and they're very assertive. They're going to tell you what they think, and they basically like to go to the beat of their own drum, if you will.
Sure. These kids probably will grow up to be leaders. They have strong capabilities or characteristics that just, hey, it's almost my way or the highway type deal.
Yeah, I think you and I both have sons who are probably more strong-willed. I think that my son will probably have to be a CEO or it's going to be hard for him. I mean, if he's not leading something,
don't be the boss.
It's going to, right. But it's
they always have something to say, but they aren't necessarily defiant.
Right. Defiant kids,
or angry.
They are trying to make you angry. Now that's different from, say, a kid who's hyperactive, all right, who inadvertently, through his behavior and impulsiveness, makes you angry. But it's not the goal or the intention of his behavior. Defiant children are trying to make you angry. And you know how it is. I mean, if you feel angry with somebody, there's a sense in which you're trying to get them angry. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the key, factors. Plus, they come unglued more. They throw huge temper tantrums. It's not just,
ADHD, though, probably has a strong correlation with oppositional defiance.
Yeah, there are. Anywhere from 40 to 60% of kids with oppositional defiance have ADHD. And about 50% of kids with ADHD have oppositional defiance.
And ADHD really, in essence, is that sort of fog factor and impulse control piece that starts coming in that has influence on their behavior.
Right. It's kids who struggle with inattention. Mm-hmm. They struggle with impulsivity.
They just have a haze about them where their mind just, they'll wander, or, I mean, it just...
Yeah, and then if you add the hyperactivity, they're bouncing all over the place. So you see these little boys who can't sit still at the table, or who like to run inside, and they can't slow themselves down, and they,
Good. So the characteristics of angry and defiant kids, some of the core characteristics or prevalence, and then the difference between a strong-willed child and a defiant child. Following along in your outline, pathways to defiance. We want to identify 3 key areas that we think you need to understand, because I think it's everything to do with treatment. It's everything to coming up with a plan of resolve for that child's life. The very first one, and Gary, I think it's sort of like an early onset thing. We acknowledge the fact that there are some kids, 10 to 15% of kids seem to have that temperament that's just sort of...
It's a difficult temperament.
Yes, that's it. It's a troublesome, you can tell, in the womb, they're kicking...
Right, right.
This is different.
When we talk about difficult temperament, it's got factors in it that they tend to be more impulsive, they're more reactive, they're more emotional to things. When they face new situations, they have great difficulty transitioning from one situation to another situation, and they can be more grumpy and more irritable than other kids.
And you probably recognize it in your own children. If you have more than one child at home, you can see the difference in kids. Certainly you can tell it by looking around you. Gary, I think also with that is that matching issue. Sometimes you have a difficult temperament in a home where a parent's very different, and they have a hard time creating pathways that work together.
Right. We call that the goodness of fit.
And so mom and dad typically then try to force this difficult child into a pathway that they like and feel comfortable with, but when there's a mismatch, it creates all kinds of chaos.
Exactly.
Because that kid's not going to fit in that box.
Right. Yeah, the parents are trying to sort of shape this child's temperament, and it doesn't fit very well with theirs, so it really can be a very explosive situation, because a parent will try to use a lot of criticism, a lot of negativism, a lot of punishment
to correct the behavior.
To try to correct the behavior. The goal is to try to correct the behavior, but the problem is that it only angers the child. So we're
and
back
precipitates more defiance.
Exactly. So that sends that pathway.
Second pathway, family stressors. Gary identified it a little bit earlier. This could be anything, Gary, from family health problems, marital problems, financial issues, transitions, role transitions, you name it.
Moves, change of jobs, any of those kind of things. Right?
And when you really think about the life of a child, think of the losses that kids typically go through. Very few parents are aware, Gary, of the loss factor in a child's life. From a grandparent to a pet to, if you relocate, the change of friends and everything that's going on. Right, it's big.
Right. A move to another area, new school, new friends, is as stressful as a death in a family. You got to keep that in mind.
Sure.
And kids, again, are very reactive to these kinds of changes, and you can see changes in their mood that come along with it. So that's the other pathway, is family stress combined with the third pathway.
Attachments.
Attachments.
Gary and I co-authored a book called Attachments, Why You Love, Feel, and Act the Way You Do. And fascinating research. It's one of probably the prize pieces of work that we have done to date together, and we're working on a new book on dealing with angry and defiant and strong-willed children right now. Gary, in that, the idea of attachments, it's different than a close relationship. Our idea is that there are attachment bonds, core relationships, by the way, that begin to influence how you do relationships.
Yeah. How you think about relationships, how you feel about relationships, all that.
Quick, give us the 5 criteria we'll interact with. The 5 criteria that establishes an attachment bond. We believe our relationship with God is an attachment bond. Our relationship with our spouse is an attachment bond. Our relationship with our children or with our parents is an attachment bond. And it's powerful. And what takes place in that relationship is really the essence of life.
An attachment relationship has 5 characteristics. The first one is seeking proximity or seeking closeness. You know that you have an attachment relationship with someone when you're under stress and you seek closeness, nearness to them, actual physical space. You want to get close to them when to find a way of comforting yourself, which brings up the second characteristic, which is an attachment relationship is a safe haven. When you're with that person and you're close to them, they help create a sense of comfort.
That's right. We're always looking for safety and comfort, something to soothe us.
And a parent-child relationship necessarily contains that component. Your child is looking for you to help get comforted when they're distressed. Now, a lot of kids don't show distress by crying or whining. A lot of times they can be angry and frustrated and difficult. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, a third component of attachment relationship is what we call secure base exploration. It's the idea that if I know you're there for me and I'm close to you, all right, and you will be there for me, that creates a secure base for me to go out and explore the world, all right, and to take on curiosity.
So when I feel safe, my level of exploration, my ability to engage the world is radically different.
It is. And for example, kids' willingness to go into the school and to make friends, to find homework or find academic topics at least partially interesting, they want to explore that, comes from a secure base. Okay? And then fourth is the idea that a separation, and we define a separation as anything that threatens the attachment relationship, creates anxiety and anger, and usually a mixture of them. Right. And sometimes, let me just illustrate real quickly, and to bring this alive for you and a parent, is a lot of times I'll point out to moms, imagine that your husband tells you that he's going to be home at 6 o'clock. And at 9:30 he walks through the door without a phone call. What kind of emotions are you going to feel? Well, it's probably going to be a mixture of anxiety and anger. Anxiety about what's happened to you, where were you, did something bad happen to you, and anger as, you know, I'm really ticked off at you. And you're going to be mixed as to which one you're going to feel. So same thing for kids. Anything that threatens the attachment bond, anything that makes them think that you're not there for them will create a mixture of anxiety and anger. For kids, though, they don't say, I'm angry at you, they act out.
They sure do.
Right. Now, the last thing is that loss of a relation, a perceived loss of a relationship leads to sadness and depression. So if you look at this model, what it does is it creates a context to understand that how we learn how to deal with our feelings and where our primary feelings come from have to do with a close attachment relationship. And when we think about these family stressors that go on, one of the things that they do is they often threaten the attachment relationship between a parent and a child. Because, you know, for example, if a parent gets sick, a child's going to wonder, are they going to be there for me?
That's right.
Or if, let's say, dad's job changed and now he gets home at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night once you're in bed, and that becomes a major...
When you feel threatened in that relationship, it throws you into chaos. Really, spiritually, think about it for a moment. When we feel disconnected with God, what does it do to us? When we feel a perceived loss, when we sin, when there's brokenness in our life, it really affects our core being in every way. The idea that we're trying to communicate here, and here's a good principle that Josh McDowell often gives. Rules without relationships will lead to rebellion. I tell you this, if you're disciplining all the time, if you feel there's a real disconnect, if you're exhausted because this is a real battle for you, Gary, and I'll tell you this, the quality of your relationship with your child has everything to do with the effectiveness of your discipline. You show me a home where all that's going on is discipline, and I'll show you a home that's lost relational connection. Now, that's setting up the thesis of where we're going to bring this thing home for strategies for stressed out parents. Gary, unfortunately, in this process of attachment, we do develop soul wounds, and it affects our core relational beliefs about how we perceive other people, whether or not we find them available, accessible. Can I trust them with my heart? And it also affects my belief about myself. Am I worthy to be loved? Am I lovable?
Am I lovable? Right.
I mean, it's that kind of thing. And so when I get into moments of stress or duress in my life, when my sort of attachment relationship is threatened, it's what do I go to calm or soothe myself, and what kind of emotion pours out of me. Hence the idea of anger and defiance, profound sorrow, grief that's uncontrolled. You know that? That's unhealthy. That's the factor we believe that we're seeing in a lot of homes that is influencing the anger and defiance in that home.
Right, so the soul wound, or the attachment wound in the child, in a sense, is what creates the wrath. Remember the don't provoke your children to wrath. This creates the wrath in the child. Now what happens when a child gets angry is that's where you start to see acting out, defiant, spiteful, vindictive, resentful, easily annoyed kind of kid. He's worked up. And what happens is then parents who are stressed out themselves overreact to this. They don't try to figure out what's going on.
Behaviorally.
Right.
They try to control or get invested, which leads us to, in the outline, point number 4. It's the idea of parental patterns of response.
To the wounded child.
To this wounded child. This child is going through a sense, whether it's real or perceived, it's real to the child. And what they're doing in there has everything to do with your response as a parent, that person of influence in his or her life. Now, Gary, the first parental pattern of response, we call it the coercion model. Really, it's that parent who gets so frustrated, what they try to do is, okay, they just want to reach over and just set you down and straighten you out. And they bring the rules down even more tightly in that child's life. It makes sense. All right, if that's the way you're going to be, fine, this is what we're going to do.
Right, so one of the things that they do in coercive parenting is that they actually crank up the number of commands that they issue toward their child. In an interesting way, research has shown that parents with oppositional children, defiant children, actually issue more commands than parents do normally. And interestingly, normal parents are issuing anywhere from 1,400 to 2,000 commands a day.
And even the best of kids can't keep those.
The best of kids only keep 80%. So what happens is in coercive parenting, it includes four things. One is a lot of ineffective commands. You're issuing a ton of commands towards your child. Pick up that, pick up this, pick up that, do this, do
get
that,
up,
do this. Get
brush your teeth. Hey, get in here.
The second thing is that they repeat the command. So if you tell a child to do something, he doesn't do it, they wait and then they repeat. Johnny, I told you to do this. Johnny, I told you to do this. And this happens anywhere from 3 to 7 times. So in one sense, what a child starts to do is starts to learn how to make a parent angry by not doing what they ask them to do when they're told to do it. Right? This has a very reinforcing factor to it for a child, because remember, they're angry at you and they want to get even. And one of the best ways to make somebody mad is not to do what you ask them to do.
And they're angry because they feel threatened.
They're angry because they feel threatened, and they're angry because they don't even know why they're angry. They're just angry at that point in time. Third is parents begin to use threats. If you don't do this,
you turn up the heat. What
then
you
just turn. I'm going to either spank you or I'm going to take your Nintendo away for the next 2 years, kind of thing. And this usually goes from 3 to 5 times that we'll do this. And now, by the time you issued the first command and you're down to the threat, where you basically have to make a decision, I'm going to do something, can sometimes be 40 to 50 minutes. So here's a kid who's getting out of doing something that he doesn't want to do. He's making you mad. This is very reinforcing, because when you get a delay doing something you don't want to do, then that's reinforcing. And then finally, the parent's faced with 2 decisions. Either they give in, they acquiesce.
Absolutely.
Which a lot of times they do.
Hey, Gary, when you're stressed out, when you're pushed to the nth degree, and you want to come home and have a good relationship, but you don't want to be the heavy all the time, it's easy to say, you know what?
Right. So they acquiesce, or they aggress. And usually it's not a controlled aggression. It's not the way that we want it to be.
I saw a scene of that the other day. We were at a church, Awana competition deal. And after the Awana program, this dad has this boy out there, and he berates this kid in front of everybody. And the kid just wanted to get up and get some, I think he wanted one of those little taffy things, you know. Well, I love those things myself. Gary, and he was inhibited a little bit. He was a little shy because the other kids were pressing in. And his dad was so, get up in the front of that line. Go get that stuff. Daddy, I'm there. And the kid was scared. You know what the dad did? Jerked him out of the line, marched that kid out in that parking lot, and started, that kid's crying. And Dad is just yelling at him all the way down through. My son Zach sees it, and he says, that's ridiculous, Dad.
Well, see that becomes another attachment
But
wound.
see, that dad was frustrated too.
He was stressed out dad, and we don't want to take anything away from stressed out parents, so we're going to show you some ways of handling your kids that are different.
Right.
But that becomes a wound again. All right, so the cycle comes full circle.
Which impacts that child's ability to relationally connect.
Exactly.
And mom and dad.
And if the parent acquiesces, see, what that means is that the child learns that he can get even with you by putting it off, and for a kicker, he gets to avoid doing something that he doesn't want to do anyway. So this becomes an incredibly reinforcing pattern that just keeps building itself and growing in intensity.
Coercion. There's a lot of negative emotion that comes through that whole piece. Gary, the other issue under parental patterns of response is this withdrawal or negative view of the child. I think a lot of parents just get so frustrated. They throw their hands up in the air, and next thing you know, the level of communication or love, that emotional connection, those emotional strands that are so necessary for healthy families begin to dissipate. They disappear.
Well, they do, and a lot of times, and if you have a child who's like this, you probably agree with what most parents say, and they'll say, I love my child, I'll do anything for him, but I can't stand him. I mean, secretly, I can't stand this child. He makes me just want to
What's amazing,
nuts.
Gary, is that's pretty common.
Well, see, kids, the thing about kids is that they're wonderful perceivers but terrible interpreters. And they're not able to make the distinction that you love them but you don't like them. So they don't make that distinction. And consequently, that again comes back to the wounding issue. If a child believes that their parent doesn't love them, bang, look what happens. Right? It's going to create wrath. And wrath leads to the problems that you're seeing.
Gary, what really concerns me probably in this thing most is that we develop like that CNN syndrome where all we do is see negative stuff in our child all the time. We don't see the positive anymore.
Well, it's really amazing.
And we reinforce negative behavior.
It does. And it's really amazing. I play around with parents sometimes. We talk about CNN syndrome, which is the idea that if you watch the news sometimes, all they do are cover negative stories about what's going on in the world. All right? And everybody knows that. You can watch the news and think, man, the world's falling apart. That's the kind of view that we develop of our kids. The other one is kind of based on how we explain things about our kids and what we pay attention to and what we ignore. Remember the joke that we've given about how the media might cover someone like George Bush. If I told you that joke about George Bush is out on a yacht with the Pope. And of course the media is covering this and they're taking pictures and the wind blows and throws the Pope's hat into the water. And they're going to have a Coast Guard, ship go pick that thing up, and W says, no, that's okay, I'll go get it. So he climbs down in the water, walks across the water, picks up the hat, wrings it out, brings it back, gives it to the Pope. They got pictures of him, walking across the water, and in the, New York Times, the next day, shows a picture of W walking across the water. And it reads, George Bush can't swim.
So the idea is that no matter what happens, no matter what good is in your child, you don't see it anymore and you don't reinforce it.
Right. It becomes a pattern.
Gary, it's a pattern that's easy to fall into, especially, this sort of a recap for a moment, especially when, say, God's given you a temperament in your child that's very difficult. And 10 to 15% of those kids are born that way.
Yeah.
In addition, you got a lot of family stressors going on. Could be any number of things. Money, moves, loss, etc. Gary, just so much. Marital discord. And it seems like kids start draining things from us. We were talking this morning at breakfast how that in a lot of homes, kids have become just sort of the peripheral.
They do. They're background noise.
Background noise.
Yeah.
But that's, if we're going to have a healthy future, we've got to be invested in our kids.
We do.
Gary, let's jump quickly then to our final piece, and that is on treatment strategies. What it's all about to help transition through anger and defiance in a child's life. Let's begin in our outline. There you see it, the issue of a corrective, relational, or relationship experience. We spent a lot of time in the attachments book on why you love, feel, and act the way you do, Gary, looking at how our personal relationship, our vertical relationship with God, is very much based in a safe haven type of thing. That security, that being in Him, that a change of heart is what precipitates a change of behavior.
Exactly.
What does that mean for parents?
Well, it means that in the same way, we're going to use a model. We believe that the model that God uses with us to change our behavior would also be the model that you would begin to use with your child to change his or her behavior. And the idea is, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The idea is that the love was definitely at the centerpiece of the way God goes after your heart to change your heart. Because if you can change a heart, if you can win a child's heart, you can change his behavior. So the plan that we propose for parents begins with a radical commitment on your part to transform this relationship with your child. And you're not going to wait for the child to take the lead in the same way that God didn't wait for us to take the lead. You're going to take it, and you're going to commit yourself to the process and the time and the frustration that goes into the literal sweat on the brow to make this happen.
Rules without relationship leads to rebellion. Follow that principle. So we're really focusing on the relationship piece. We feel parents, when there's a lot of anger and defiance, come down heavy and go into that coercion type thing. Even if they're withdrawing, they still tend to have a desire to push the boundary issue extra hard. But what we really feel is missing is this relational piece in here. Now, Gary, getting this core sort of corrective relational experience going, key components. The first one that you and I love to talk about is floor time. Getting parents to increase communication through floor time. Explain what floor time has been for you. And
when you think of floor time, you're thinking of a young child where you actually get down on the floor with them and sort of you enter their world. You enter their world of play. You connect with them. For kids who are a little older, you may not necessarily get on the floor, but you use every opportunity that you have, whether it be breakfast, whether it be dinner, whether it be changing clothes, riding in the car to school, to baseball practice, to interact with your kid. Don't crank up that radio and listen to it on the way to practice. Talk to your child. Try to engage them in a lot of back and forth communication about what's going on. Stay interested. Stay engaged. Now, you might find that your child doesn't want to talk to you, and that's part of the issue. So how do you engage them without being intrusive, without, ask them lots of super sensitive questions, but interest? Who's
you're not
Johnny?
Interrogating your kid.
Right,
you're interacting with your child.
Right.
All the time, every moment you can.
In fact, we play with parents. We teach them ways that, for example, if Johnny says, well, I don't want to talk to you, Mom. Well, why not? Well, I mean, have I done something that's ticked you off, right? Pull him into that conversation. He might say, yeah, you're always trying to tell me what to do. Ah, you don't like being told what to do, do you? No, I don't. See, and that pulls a child in. So floor time looks for every opportunity that you can
when
connect
I think
with
of
your
my growing up years, my mother had us come in at night to her bed, and we would talk every night before we went to sleep.
Right.
And it was probably that was the teachable moment, and she knew it. It didn't matter, even into our teen years, when we'd come back home, even late, we'd come in, she'd want us to talk to her before we hit the crib together.
And that's the idea of floor time, is that you make these almost rituals, breakfast time, dinner time, bedtime, card time.
Let's go back. The angry and defiant child, typical scenarios, difficult temperament. You've got a lot of family stressors and things like that going, a lot of demands that are pulling for our affection for one another, Gary. Compound it by the way we tend to respond to anger and other issues in our life. It creates a pretty tough mess. So getting people started back into floor time is one of the most challenging things we face in therapy.
It is, and when people can't do it, that's part of the problem. They get frustrated at us sometimes because we really press on this. But remember the principle. Rules without relationships lead to rebellion. If you got a rebellious child, it usually means it's not because of a lack of rules, all right? It's because of a lack of relationship.
Floor time is number one. Number two, we call it special time, based on the principle or the work of Russell Barkley.
Russell Barkley talks about taking a very specific period of time each day where and it'll be about 15 to 20 minutes, where you will pick up with your child wherever they are and what they're doing and engage with them in their play. And you allow the child to lead this. If they want to pass ball, you pass ball. If they want to play a board game, you play a board game. The only thing that we tell parents not to do...
Hang out time with your child.
Hang out time with your child.
You're not allowed allowed to have rule. You cannot be, it's command-free special time.
Right. Obviously, if they're hitting you and
you don't condone behavior you don't stand behind.
Right.
But your goal is to be a participant in this relationship.
And it's not a time to teach. This is not a time where you lecture your child about why they shouldn't think this way or think that way.
It's
there
just
is a time for
get into their world.
That's right. It's getting into their world.
The concept of special time, Gary, Barclay found that it was radical. When parents participate in special time, something took place in that parent-child relationship that literally transformed the anger and defiance in kids. Parents and children learned language together.
Right.
They learned how to talk.
Yeah.
They learned needs and desires, things that motivated the child that they probably didn't see a lot before, which, by the way, also influences their ability to do good discipline now.
That's right. Well, one of the things that we have parents do when they do special time is I have parents go get a log, and they begin to log down and write down their special times, what they did, and specifically want you to label and write down something special that you found out about your child that you didn't know before. So you're looking for this now. Remember, the old pattern is that you were looking for the bad behavior, trying to pick it up and then criticize and discipline the child for that. Whereas the focus here is finding something about your child that you like, that you're trying to lift up, okay, and remember. See, this is a radical transformation in the way that you think about your child.
One case that we were working, I remember this mother, Gary, we had, she was the perfect mom. I mean, perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect everything. And yet in this, in the life of her child, when Gary and I talked to her about doing special time, our first response was, I don't have 15 or 20 minutes a day, you guys. You don't understand. I don't know how I can work that in. Yet she was perfect, I'm telling you.
Right.
And then the second most common challenge that we face is, what are we going to do during special time?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Tell us what to do as parents.
Well, one of the things that you do is you're going to relax, all right? If you're uptight around your child and you can't do special time, then this means this is a time for you to grow, all right? This is a time for you to learn how to relax. It's a time for you to learn how to let your child lead and you follow, okay? And that's the main principle in this. Let your child lead, you follow, and what you're trying to do is develop a very specific mindset that says, wow, that's really interesting. Remember, kids think about themselves that, you know, for example, my son loves baseball cards. If I'm not interested in baseball cards, no matter how I try to sell it, my kid's going to think I'm not interested in him. For me to sit down and let him talk to me,
because
talk baseball.
Baseball cards are us. I mean,
that's the way he thinks of it.
It's
right
me.
now.
And so if you reject that, you are rejecting me.
Exactly. I get in there and listen to his baseball minutia. And, you know, he said to me the other day, Dad, I know more about baseball than you do. I said, well, and he was very proud about it. But I said, teach me more. He loves it. He loves to sit down and give me.
Yeah.
But see, inwardly, that's saying you value me and you care about me. This produces a mindset that says, I want to please you, Dad. Right? So special time is a powerful tool.
Good. Floor time, special time. Going down through a third principle is the idea of getting empathy into the relationship, Gary, and into the soul of a child.
Empathy is the most powerful parenting technique that we can teach you.
One of the things that's common is people often associate empathy, Gary, with sympathy. Having sympathy for someone else, teaching kids to be sympathetic toward others. That's not the principle here that we're trying to really get across.
Yes, sympathy implies that you feel sorry for, or that you feel the feelings of the other person. Empathy also does not mean that you agree with a person's perspective, or that you endorse it, or you're advocating it. It simply means that you're able to see and get behind their eyes and see what they're seeing.
So obviously the implication is it's important for a parent to be empathetic then toward child first.
It is. It's first seek to understand your child before you try to change your child. Right.
First seek to understand. So Gary, teaching a parental sort of directive here of empathy, how do we go about making that happen? How do we get them sort of to see behind the eyes of a child, through the lens of a child, from a child's world or a child's perspective?
Well, there's three pieces to empathy.
A lot of parents can't do this.
Well, and there's a lot of adults who can't do it with each other. as is in your book on Before a Bad Goodbye, you talk about the importance of empathy and working with couples. Empathy has 3 steps. The first one is being able to get the story right. So you're going to check it out with your child. So you're ticked off at your sister because she did this, this, and this. Is that right? Okay, so the first thing that you're trying to do is really just describe what it is that you think that they're seeing and feeling about a situation. The second is that you communicate to them that you understand it. You check it out with them. Are you mad because of this, or is it this way? Okay? And third is that the person believes that you understand, and they acknowledge it. Yeah, Dad, that's right. That's why I'm ticked off. Now, what'll get in the way of empathy is if you try to argue with your child about the facts. That's not the goal here.
No.
The goal in empathy is simply to try to understand where they're coming from and that they believe you understand that. And you will see if you can achieve empathy with your child around any emotional issue, you're going to see him go.
So, Gary, sort of to recap this just for a second, you can do floor time, you can do special time, but the goal ultimately is to develop empathy out of it.
Floor time and special time usually just occur, and it's usually when a child's doing pretty good.
The goal is to get that
empathy. To get connected. Empathy, it comes up, and the opportunity for empathy comes up when the child's upset. Mm-hmm. So you instead of when they start to get upset, instead of saying, get out of that attitude, this becomes an opportunity for empathy. It becomes a time to say, what's going on with you? What's got you upset? Right? So instead of boom, 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 trying to say, get rid of that attitude, or I'm going to put you in the chair, get rid of that attitude, I'm going to take something away. Use this as an opportunity to engage them. Remember, they're upset. They need to learn what they feel and how they feel.
My daughter Megan was on the playground at school, and she said, Dad, this one girl, we were playing basketball, just vicious. Just vicious, Dad. I walked up to her and said, you know, you don't have to behave like that. And she said, Megan said she told her the story about her family. And it was interesting to watch Megan's reaction. Dad, I understood then why she was doing what she was doing, but my response to her was this: that still doesn't have to cause you to take it out on us.
Right.
You see that? Right. And she said at that moment, that girl went,
that's right. But once you have empathy,
said, I'm sorry.
Once you have the empathy, then you can move into problem solving and limits.
See, it sets the stage.
Sets the stage.
And we're going to part 4 in the outline there, and that is problem solving. You've got to get to a place now where you're defining problems and you're helping children. It isn't just you, Mom or Dad. It's not just you, counselor, trying to get in there and say, okay, here's the agenda.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the goal, but we want them to be able to develop it on their own and to test it and try it out.
Right. See, coming out of empathy, what empathy begins to do for your child that sets up problem solving is A, it helps them realize what they're thinking and feeling about something. Surprisingly, kids don't know this. They don't know what's going on inside of them. When you empathize with them, you're giving them words and language to deal with it instead of behavior. Okay? So this becomes powerful. The other thing that empathy does, it also begins to help a child see what other people are thinking and feeling. They generally, aggressive kids and angry kids generally assume that people are hostile and negative and against them. Whereas if you build empathy, if you show your child empathy, they start to learn that other people think differently too. So then you move into problem solving, which the first step is defining what the problem is. If you've empathized with someone, you've defined what the problem is. The problem is this. The other steps in problem solving include helping your child figure out what can we do about it? What do you think? Right? Instead of saying, well, this is what you're going to do, boom, 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 give them an opportunity to give some of their ideas. Now, they're going to give you some really dumb ones, some really stupid ideas. And what you're going to do then is not say, that's stupid. What you're going to do is you're going to begin to ask them, well, what do you think will happen? What if you do this? What do you see? Get them to anticipate consequences.
Some would say, Gary, you mean you really engage your children at that level? And the answer is yes.
Yes. Because
that's the goal.
If you want them to emotionally deal with their emotions like a big leaguer, you've got to practice with them like a big leaguer.
All the time.
All the time. And these become opportunities. Now look, I had to do this with my son last night at the baseball park because he was upset about a friend not playing with him. And one of the things that happens, I notice about my own self, is I get very anxious when my child's upset. And I just want it to come to an end. Right? And sometimes I don't have the patience to put up with the feelings that they're showing me. But to sit there and say, what's bugging you? What's eating you? Right? And helping them figure it out, and then helping them come up with solutions, and then to anticipate the consequences of their solutions becomes critical. Because again, these kids struggle with, how's that going to work out for you, Johnny?
And that that ability has everything to do then with, by the way, and that's your last point in the outline, limit setting, boundaries. They are significant. They're very important. We believe in the importance of boundaries. Kids need structure. They do in their lives. And Gary, it's out of this structure then that they really can flourish and grow. Discipline, by the way, I'm going to go back. I said it earlier. The quality of your relationship will determine the effectiveness of your discipline strategies. Remember, discipline is about an act. Punishment is about a person. Two different worlds. Love supersedes all of it. And we sort of want to wrap this whole thing. I'm going to take you back to a spiritual concept here in your own walk with God. James chapter 1, James, down in about verse 14, starts talking about sin. But every man is tempted when he's drawn away from his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin when it's finished brings forth death. Don't err, my beloved brethren, because every good gift, every perfect gift cometh from above, from the Father of lights, within whom there is no variableness, no shadow of turning. It's interesting, Gary. God's a God of limits, but the defining character of God is love. Do you know that? And it's because of His love, that we are not consumed. And when you respond to God spiritually out of a heart of love, when you see who you are before the presence of an almighty God who loves you, who's the lover of your soul, the one who pursues you, then your response, even your challenge, yea, even the boundaries in your life makes sense, and your heart cries out, oh God. There's nothing more, I think, amazing in life than to have your child fall limp into your arms. Even when they're kicking and throwing a temper tantrum, you pick them up and you embrace them with love. You've seen it's out of that sense of empathy and boundary setting that they want to serve you. Now, we know all kids are not perfect and that this is a journey and that there are no, quote, clear, hard, and fast answers, but we really believe the core to healthy development in a child and the key to overcoming defiance, anger in your child, is relationship. Our prayer is that God will take these concepts and multiply them in your life, and if you're a counselor, pastor, what have you, that it'll be multiplied tenfold as you give it to others. Thanks for being a part of our time together.